Mother Bear was chained to a railway track. Baby's next move left everyone in tears. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The blizzard swept through the small town, carrying with it howling winds that sounded like nature's lament. Snow fell thickly, burying roads, blanketing rooftops, and turning the landscape into a frozen wasteland. Inside a modest wooden cabin, Aurora sat curled up by the fireplace, her eyes fixed on the window. Suddenly, she stiffened. Amidst the howling wind, she heard something strange, a deep, guttural roar, echoing through the frigid air. At first, Aurora thought she was imagining things. But then, the sound came again, this time filled with pain and desperation. She turned to her mother, tugging at her sleeve. "Mommy, I hear something out there. An animal. It's crying for help." Her mother stroked her hair and smiled gently. "It's just the wind, sweetheart. Don't go outside tonight. The storm is dangerous." But Aurora wasn't convinced. She felt something was terribly wrong. Her little heart pounded as she quietly grabbed her thick coat and slipped out the door. The storm cut through her like a blade, but she didn't stop. She followed the cry, trudging through the deep snow, her small feet sinking with every step. Finally, she reached the source and gasped. On the railroad tracks, a massive mother bear was chained down, its wild eyes filled with terror. Its fur was stained with blood, its breaths coming in ragged gasps. Aurora took a step back, her heart hammering. Then she turned, and horror filled her chest. The bright headlights of an approaching train pierced through the storm, roaring closer with unstoppable force. "No!" Aurora screamed, rushing forward to yank at the chain. But it was too heavy. She pulled with all her might, but it wouldn't budge. The bear let out a weak, despairing growl, its eyes pleading for help. "Somebody, help!" Aurora cried, her voice swallowed by the wind. Just then, a dark figure emerged from the blizzard. A man, wrapped in a thick coat, his face partially hidden beneath a hood. He sprinted toward her, pulling out a large knife and hacking at the chain. "Run, kid. This isn't a place for you. No, I can't let it die." The man paused, staring at her in disbelief. But there was no time to argue. With one final slash, a sharp snap echoed through the storm. The chain broke. The bear staggered to its feet, but it was too weak to move. The train was only seconds away. "Move!" the man shouted. And together they pushed the bear off the tracks just as the train thundered past, obliterating the shattered remains of the chain. All three collapsed into the snow. Aurora gasped for breath, while the bear let out a pained whimper, its body trembling with exhaustion. The man turned to Aurora, his sharp eyes filled with both astonishment and suspicion. "You're not afraid of it?" Aurora shook her head. "It doesn't want to hurt me. It just wants help." The man was silent for a long moment before sighing. "We have to move. If we don't, they'll come back." "They? Who?" "The ones who chained it here. And they won't stop." Aurora shuddered. She could feel the fear in his voice, the kind of fear that was real. They helped the mother bear into the snowy woods, each step a struggle. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, shattering the fragile silence. The man yanked Aurora down, his voice low and urgent. "They found us!" Aurora peeked through the trees. Dark silhouettes moved through the blizzard, rifles in hand. She clenched the bear's paw, her pulse hammering in her ears. "What do we do now?" she whispered. The man drew a knife from his belt. "Run, when I say. Don't look back." But Aurora couldn't run. She felt something stir deep within her, something ancient and powerful, a connection between her and the bear. She slowly raised her hand, and something incredible happened. From the depths of the forest, a low growl rumbled. Then another. Shadows began to move in the storm. Grizzly bears emerged from the blizzard, their keen eyes locking onto the poachers. One man yelled, raising his gun. But before he could fire, a bear lunged, sending him sprawling into the snow. The others panicked and fled. Aurora turned to the mother bear. It looked at her, understanding passing between them, then let out a deep, resonant growl. The grizzly stopped, then silently retreated into the night. The man stared at Aurora, eyes wide with shock. "What did you just do?" Aurora didn't know, but she felt it in her heart, an unbreakable bond between herself and the bears. But the joy was short-lived. The mother bear was too weak to go on. It collapsed into the snow, its eyes slowly closing. Aurora dropped to her knees, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please don't go." The man placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice rough. "It fought long enough. Let it rest." Aurora sobbed, her small hands buried in the bear's thick fur. The storm still howled, but for a moment, the world seemed utterly still. Years later, Aurora grew up to be a fierce protector of the wild. The little girl who once saved a bear now led conservation efforts, standing against those who sought to harm them. But sometimes, on snowy nights, she still heard a deep growl echoing from the woods. A reminder that on that fateful night, she hadn't just saved a bear. She had found herself. The howling blizzard showed no mercy, wrapping the forest in a suffocating blanket of white. Aurora's small hands, red from the biting cold, gripped the fur of the fallen mother bear, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The man beside her, Elias, she now knew his name, kept his knife ready, his sharp eyes scanning the storm for any sign of the poachers. Aurora felt the bear's body rise and fall weakly beneath her touch. The train was gone, but danger still lurked in the shadows. Elias pulled her up gently. "We have to move." His voice was low, urgent. "They won't give up that easily." Aurora hesitated, looking down at the bear. "But she's too weak to go on." Elias exhaled sharply. He knelt beside the bear, his gloved hand pressing against its flank. "She won't survive if we stay here. They'll come back." He turned to Aurora, his eyes filled with something unspoken. "Can you call them again?" Aurora knew what he meant. The grizzlies, the ones that had appeared from the storm like spirits answering her silent plea. She swallowed hard. She had no idea how she had done it the first time. It had felt instinctual. A force deep within her had reached out, and they had answered. She closed her eyes, focusing. Her small fingers curled into the snow as she breathed in the icy air. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But something inside her shifted, like a ripple through the frozen ground. A deep rumble came from the trees, then another. The sound sent shivers down her spine, not from fear, but from recognition. They were coming. Elias watched in quiet disbelief as dark shapes materialized through the snowfall. One by one, the grizzlies emerged from the white abyss, their massive forms nearly blending into the storm. The largest among them, a bear with a single jagged scar over its eye, stepped forward, snorting as its breath curled into the frozen air. Aurora met its gaze, her heart pounding. "She needs help," she whispered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, to Elias's astonishment, the scarred bear bent its head, nuzzling the fallen mother bear. With slow, deliberate movements, the others followed, surrounding her. One nudged at her side, urging her to rise. And then she did. Weak, trembling, but standing, Aurora's eyes welled up. They were helping her. Elias muttered something under his breath, something she didn't quite catch. He turned toward the trees. "We need to get deeper into the forest. They'll track our footprints otherwise." Aurora nodded. She took one last glance at the railroad tracks before following Elias into the swirling blizzard. The grizzlies moved with them, their presence a silent, powerful force in the night. They traveled for what felt like hours, winding through dense trees and treacherous snowdrifts. The storm had swallowed the last remnants of the town's lights, leaving only the vast, frozen wilderness ahead. Aurora's legs ached, her small body exhausted from the cold and fear. Then, finally, Elias stopped. A cabin stood nestled between towering evergreens, its roof weighed down by heavy snow. It looked old, abandoned, forgotten by time. Elias approached cautiously, brushing frost from the wooden door before pushing it open. The interior was small, barely more than a single room. A few rusted lanterns hung from hooks on the walls, and a stone fireplace sat cold in the corner. Elias moved quickly, lighting the lanterns and stacking firewood. Soon, a warm glow flickered to life, casting long shadows across the cabin. Aurora knelt beside the mother bear as the other grizzlies settled outside, their heavy bodies pressing against the walls like silent guardians. The bear shuddered, her strength nearly gone. Elias tossed a heavy coat toward Aurora. "Stay here, keep warm." Aurora caught the coat, frowning. "Where are you going?" Elias hesitated. "We need medicine, food. If she doesn't eat, she won't make it through the night, but it's dangerous out there. I'll be back." His tone left no room for argument. Then, without another word, he disappeared into the storm. Aurora sat by the fire, exhaustion finally creeping over her. She curled against the mother bear's side, her small fingers resting against its fur. A sound woke her. Not the wind, not the bears outside. Something else. A sharp crunch of footsteps on ice. Aurora's breath caught. She sat up slowly, heart hammering in her chest. The fire crackled softly, the only source of warmth in the freezing cabin. Then, a shadow passed by the window. Her blood ran cold. Elias had gone in the opposite direction. Whoever was out there wasn't him. The doorknob rattled. Aurora's breath hitched. Her hands clutched the blanket around her shoulders. The grizzlies outside growled low, deep in their chests. Then a voice. "Open the door, little girl, little girls." It was a man's voice. Deep. Rough. Aurora's fingers curled into the fabric of her coat. She didn't move. "Come on now," the voice coaxed. "We know you're in there." Another voice, harsher. "Just break it down." Aurora barely had time to react before the door splintered inward. The lanterns flickered wildly as two figures stepped inside, bundled in heavy coats, their boots covered in ice and snow. Their eyes swept over the cabin, until they landed on her. A slow smile crept across the taller man's face. Well, look what we have here." Aurora's heart pounded against her ribs. She scrambled back toward the bear, her small body shielding it instinctively. The second man stepped closer, his boots crunching against the wooden floor. "Where's the man? The one who was with you?" Aurora said nothing. Her hands clenched into fists. "Smart girl." The first man chuckled. He reached into his coat and pulled out a long hunting knife. Aurora barely had time to react before a deafening roar shook the cabin. The walls trembled as the grizzlies outside surged forward, their massive bodies slamming into the wooden structure. The two men barely had time to turn before the scarred grizzly barreled through the doorway, its teeth bared in a snarl that could shake the earth itself. Chaos erupted. The first man lunged for Aurora, but she ducked, scrambling toward the fire. The second man tried to raise his weapon, but the grizzly was faster. A single swipe of its massive paw sent him crashing into the wall. Aurora's pulse pounded in her ears. The taller man turned toward her, his knife flashing in the firelight, but before he could take another step, the mother bear rose. Weak, wounded, but standing. She let out a low, guttural growl, and in that moment, Aurora knew. She wasn't alone. The poacher hesitated, just long enough for the mother bear to lunge. The last thing Aurora saw was the flicker of fear in the man's eyes before he was knocked to the ground. Then, silence. The wind howled outside. The fire crackled. And the mother bear, her strength nearly gone, turned to Aurora one last time. Before sinking back into the snow-covered floor, Elias burst through the doorway moments later, his rifle raised. His eyes widened at the scene before him. The broken door, the unconscious men, the bears standing guard around Aurora. She turned to him, trembling. "They came for us." Elias's jaw tightened. He knelt beside her, his voice firm. "They won't come back." Aurora looked at the mother bear, at the grizzly still watching over them, and something in her heart told her he was right. The fight wasn't over, but neither was she. Aurora stared at Elias, her small hands clenched into fists as she tried to process his words. The mother bear, this gentle, wounded creature, had once been part of something sinister. A military experiment? It sounded impossible, like something out of the bedtime stories her mother used to tell her. But the fear in Elias's eyes told her it was real, deadly real. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls of the cabin. Outside, the storm had begun to ease, the howling wind giving way to an eerie silence. The other grizzlies still lingered nearby, their massive bodies barely visible through the frost-coated window. Elias sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You need to understand something, kid. This isn't just about the bear. It's about what she carries." Aurora frowned. "Carries." He hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the mother bear who lay motionless by the fire. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, her fur still damp with melted snow. "Not just her body," Elias muttered. "Her blood. Her DNA. She's different. Smarter. Stronger. And they want her back." Aurora felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Who are they?" Elias's jaw tightened. "People who don't take kindly to failure. They spent years creating something they couldn't control. When she escaped, they didn't just lose a test subject. They lost a weapon. And now they want to make sure she never falls into the wrong hands." Aurora's breath caught in her throat. "That's why they chained her to the tracks," she whispered, horrified. "They weren't just trying to kill her. They were making a statement." Elias nodded grimly. "Exactly. But she's still alive, and that means we're running out of time." A sudden noise outside snapped them both to attention, a rustling barely perceptible over the dying wind. Elias was on his feet in an instant, his hand dropping to the hunting knife strapped to his belt. Aurora held her breath. Then, a knock. Not a pounding, not an attempt to break in, just a single deliberate knock. Elias motioned for Aurora to stay back. He moved toward the door, pressing his ear against the wood. Another knock. A pause. Then a voice. Low, urgent. "Reed, open up. We need to talk." Elias's grip tightened on his knife. "No one calls me that anymore." Aurora's eyes widened. Whoever was outside knew him. A long silence followed. Then, the voice spoke again. "You're not going to like what I have to say. But if you want to keep that girl and that bear alive, you'll let me in." Elias exhaled sharply. He glanced at Aurora, then at the mother bear, still too weak to move. Finally, he unlatched the door. The wind pushed it open, revealing a tall figure wrapped in a thick coat, snow clinging to his hood. He stepped inside without invitation, shaking off the cold, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Aurora shrank back instinctively. There was something unsettling about him, something that reminded her of a wolf circling its prey. The man's gaze landed on the bear, and he let out a low whistle. "Damn. She's still breathing. Didn't think you had it in you, Reed." Elias crossed his arms. "What do you want, Cole?" Cole smirked. but there was no humor in his eyes. "Same thing as you, I'd wager. To keep our heads attached to our bodies." Aurora frowned. "Who is he?" Cole's gaze flicked to her, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Reed never told you? I'm his insurance policy. And right now, you're standing in the middle of a war you don't even understand." Elias's expression darkened. "Cut to the chase." Cole sighed, shedding his coat and tossing it onto a chair. "Fine. The people who want that bear dead? They're already on their way. They're not just hunters this time, Reed. They're military. Black Ops. And they don't leave loose ends." Aurora's stomach twisted. "But why? She's just a bear." Cole gave a dry laugh. "If only it were that simple. You think this is about hunting? About revenge? No, sweetheart. That bear is the last piece of something much bigger. They don't care about her. They care about what's inside her. The things they put there." Aurora's head spun. What did they do to her? Cole hesitated, glancing at Elias, who remained silent. Finally, he spoke. "Let's just say, she's more than just an animal." The room fell into a tense silence. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows across Cole's face. Aurora looked between him and Elias, frustration bubbling up in her chest. "So what do we do? Just wait for them to find us?" Cole's smirk faded. "We do what we do best, kid. We run." Elias shook his head. "Not this time." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Oh, got a better idea." Elias's gaze flickered to the grizzlies outside, then to the mother bear, still fighting for every breath. His voice was quiet, but firm. "We make our stand." Cole stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he grinned. "Well, hell, this just got interesting." Aurora felt her heart pound as she realized what was about to happen. They weren't just fighting for the mother bear anymore. They were fighting for survival. The night was colder than before, the storm having passed, leaving a silent, frozen wasteland in its wake. But silence did not mean safety. Elias knew better than to mistake the absence of sound for peace. From their makeshift shelter in the old cabin, he kept watch, his sharp eyes scanning the darkened forest beyond. The grizzlies had retreated deeper into the woods, their presence still lingering like ghosts in the night. The mother bear, though weakened, had managed to stand, her instincts forcing her to fight against the exhaustion that clung to her body like ice. Aurora lay curled up in a corner, wrapped in furs. She was exhausted, but sleep didn't come easily. The truth weighed heavily on her. This wasn't just about the mother bear anymore. It was about survival. A soft knock at the door snapped Elias out of his thoughts. His grip tightened on the rifle he had placed beside him. Cole, sitting by the fire, didn't move. His eyes flicked toward the door, then to Elias. "It's them," he muttered. Elias nodded. He moved silently toward the entrance, pressing his ear against the wood. A voice, low and controlled, spoke from the other side. "Reed, we know you're in there. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Elias felt Aurora stir behind him. He shot her a glance, a silent command to stay put. He took a deep breath, then spoke. "You should have turned back when you had the chance." A chuckle. Cold. Calculated. "Come on now. You know how this works. You have something we want. Give it up and we all walk away. No one else has to get hurt." Elias exchanged a look with Cole. The other man shrugged. "They always say that before someone ends up dead." Elias turned back to the door. "You want the bear? Come and get her! Come and get her!" The response was immediate. A gunshot shattered the night. The wooden frame of the cabin splintered as a bullet tore through it, embedding itself into the wall just inches from where Aurora had been moments ago. She yelped, scrambling further back. "Damn it," Elias muttered. "They're not wasting time." Cole had already drawn his own weapon, pressing himself against the wall. "We need a way out. They'll torch this place if they have to." Elias nodded. His mind worked fast. The only way out was through the back, but that meant exposing themselves. Unless he turned to Aurora. Can you do it again? She blinked, confused. Do what? Call them. Her breath hitched. The Grizzlies. She wasn't sure how she had done it before, but something inside her stirred. A connection she barely understood. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to feel it again, to reach out beyond the walls, beyond the fear. The weight of the mother bear's presence beside her gave her strength. Then, from the forest, a low growl answered. Cole looked startled. No way. You're telling me she actually, before he could finish, the trees outside exploded with movement. Massive, shadowed forms emerged from the darkness. 3 grizzlies, their fur-bristling eyes reflecting the firelight like molten gold. One of them, the scarred leader, reared up on its hind legs and let out a roar that shook the very earth. The men outside hesitated. Then another gunshot rang out. The grizzlies charged. Elias grabbed Aurora, pulling her toward the back. Now's our chance. They burst through the rear door, the cold air slamming into them like a wall. Behind them, chaos erupted. The poachers shouted orders, gunfire echoing through the trees. The grizzlies didn't retreat. They fought. Claws slashed, teeth snapped, bodies collided with bone-crushing force. Elias ran, his breath coming in sharp bursts. Aurora clung to him, her small hands gripping his coat tightly. Cole covered their flank, firing off shots as they pushed forward into the night. They didn't stop until they reached the outskirts of town. The streets were eerily empty, the townsfolk locked away in their homes, unaware, or perhaps too afraid, to get involved. Elias pulled Aurora into the shadows of an alley, his breath misting in the air. We can't stay here, Cole nodded, reloading his gun. They'll be on us soon. That was just the first wave. You know how these people work. They don't stop. Aurora looked between them. So what do we do? Elias hesitated. He had spent years running, hiding from the past that had finally caught up with him. But this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Aurora, the bear. The grizzlies that had answered her call. For the first time in a long time, he knew running wasn't the answer. He met Cole's gaze. We make our stand. Cole let out a short laugh. Knew you'd say that. You always did have a death wish. Elias smirked. Not today. From the forest, another roar echoed. A reminder that they weren't alone. The poachers thought they were hunting prey. They had no idea what was coming for them. Aurora stood in the darkness, her breath shallow, her small hands trembling from both the cold and the weight of what she was beginning to understand. The grizzlies had answered her call, not once, not by coincidence. There was something deeper, something she couldn't yet explain, but it was real. Elias watched her closely. His years of experience had made him wary of things he couldn't explain, but he had seen it with his own eyes. The way the bears responded to Aurora, the way the scarred leader had bowed its head before her instead of attacking. It was beyond instinct. It was something ancient, something primal, and now they had to figure out what it meant before it was too late. Cole, ever the skeptic, leaned against the alley wall, arms crossed. All right, so let's say, for argument's sake, that this kid has some kind of, I don't know, freaky connection with these animals. What does that mean for us? Elias glanced at Aurora. It means she's not just another bystander in this fight. She might be the only reason we have a chance. Aurora swallowed. But I don't know how to control it. It just happens. Cole snorted. Great. So we're betting our lives on a 5-year-old's gut feeling. Solid plan, Reed. It's better than no plan, Elias shot back. Then, turning to Aurora, he knelt down. What do you feel when they come to you? When the bears listen. Aurora hesitated. It was hard to put into words. It wasn't like speaking. It wasn't even like thinking. It was deeper than that. like a pulse that connected her heart to theirs, a whisper she couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "I just know," she said finally. "It's like they can hear me even when I don't talk, and I can feel them too, like they're a part of me." Elias exchanged a glance with Cole. The other man raised an eyebrow. "You ever hear of anything like this before?" Elias exhaled. "Not exact. Legends about people who could communicate with animals, who had a bond that went beyond words. Most thought they were just myths. But if what we're seeing is real..." Cole let out a low whistle. "Then she's more valuable than the bear. And that means our friends back there won't stop until they have her." Aurora felt her stomach twist. "They want me." Elias hesitated, then nodded. "They will, once they realize what you can do. And if they get their hands on you..." A sudden rustling in the alley cut him off. Elias's hand went to his knife. Cole reached for his gun, and Aurora felt something shift inside her. A warning, a presence just beyond the shadows. Before any of them could react, a figure stepped into the dim light. It was a woman. She was older, her face lined with years of hardship, her long dark coat covered in frost. But what struck Aurora the most were her eyes, piercing and golden, almost like the bears themselves. She studied them for a moment before speaking. "You need to come with me," Cole scoffed. "Oh sure, because blindly following strangers has worked out great for us so far." The woman's gaze flicked to him, unimpressed, before returning to Aurora. "They're coming for you, child. If you stay here, you won't make it to sunrise." Elias stepped forward, his expression hard. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what she is," the woman answered, nodding toward Aurora. "And someone who can help her survive it." Aurora's heart pounded. "What am I?" The woman looked at her with something like sadness. A bridge. A last remnant of something the world tried to erase. Elias frowned. "You're talking in riddles, lady." "Try English." The woman exhaled. "There was a time long ago when humans and animals weren't so separate, when certain people were born with the ability to connect, to understand, to speak without words. They were guardians, protectors of the balance between the wild and the civilized world. But men feared what they didn't understand. They hunted them, erased them from history. Until none remained." She glanced at Aurora. "Or so we thought." A heavy silence fell over them. Aurora's mind raced. This was too much, too big. She was just a girl. She wasn't some ancient guardian. She wasn't special. "You're wrong," she whispered. "I don't know how to do any of this. I can't fight. I don't even know why the bears listen to me." The woman's expression softened. "Neither did the first ones. It's something you learn, something you become. But you have to live long enough to get there." Elias crossed his arms. "And you think you can keep her safe?" The woman's eyes darkened. "I know I can. But only if you trust me." Aurora looked up at Elias. She trusted him. He had protected her, saved her. But now, the weight of the decision was on him. If they stayed, the hunters would come. If they went with this stranger, they were stepping into something even more unknown. Elias sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Then, finally, he nodded. "We move before dawn." The woman nodded once. "Good. Then let's not waste time." Aurora's fingers curled around the fur of the mother bear, feeling its slow, steady heartbeat beneath her touch. Something was happening. Something bigger than her. And she wasn't sure she was ready for it. But ready or not, it had already begun. The night was thick with the scent of pine and frost, the snow-covered branches forming an eerie canopy above them. Elias gritted his teeth as he scanned the darkness, gripping his rifle tightly. Aurora clung to the mother bear's thick fur, her breath shallow. Around them the grizzlies loomed like living shadows, their golden eyes locked on the men emerging from the trees. The hunters moved cautiously, their weapons gleaming under the pale moonlight. They were experienced, men who had spent their lives tracking, killing. But even they hesitated now, faced with something they had never encountered before. A child standing among beasts, unafraid. One of them, a tall man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, took a step forward. His voice was calm, too calm. "Step aside, kid. This isn't your fight." Aurora's fingers dug into the mother bear's fur. She didn't move. Elias let out a slow breath. "She's not stepping aside. Neither am I." Scarface tilted his head. "You're making a mistake. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Elias chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "I think I have a pretty good idea. The kind of men who tie a wounded bear to train tracks don't leave much to the imagination." Scarface's jaw twitched. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about the bear. It's about what she is, what she carries. That thing is property of people who don't like loose ends. You, the girl, your loose ends." Aurora's heart pounded. She could feel the tension in the air, like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. The grizzlies shifted restlessly, their massive paws crunching against the snow. Then, a sound. A single low growl from the scarred grizzly standing beside her. The men stiffened. Scarface exhaled through his nose. "All right, then." He turned to his men. "Drop rem." Everything happened at once. Gunfire cracked through the night, but before the bullets could find their marks, the grizzlies lunged. A roar split the air, so loud it seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Aurora barely had time to duck as the mother bear surged forward, her weakened body moving with terrifying power. Elias fired, taking down the nearest hunter before rolling behind a fallen tree for cover. Cole, somewhere in the chaos, shouted something Aurora couldn't hear. Snow kicked up around them, flashing white and red in the moonlight. Aurora pressed her hands against her ears, but the noise wouldn't stop. The growls, the gunshots, the shouts of men being thrown to the ground. And underneath it all, something else. Something only she could hear. A pulse. A call. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She just reached. Through the madness, through the fear, through the storm of violence around her, Aurora sent out something deeper than words. A feeling. A command. And the bears listened. One by one, they turned their massive heads toward her. Blood stained their fur, but their eyes remained sharp, waiting. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. Hold. The grizzlies stilled. The sudden silence was deafening. The remaining hunters, though still standing, hesitated, their weapons shaking in their hands. Their faces paled as they realized something impossible had just happened. A child had stopped the attack with nothing but a thought. Elias stared at her, his breathing heavy. "Aurora, what did you just do?" She didn't know. She only knew that it had worked. Scarface, still alive but bloodied, pushed himself up from the snow, disbelief flashing across his face. "What the hell are you?" Aurora's lips parted, but she had no answer. Before she could speak, the deep thud of helicopter blades cut through the night air. Elias's head snapped up. "Damn it, they're bringing in reinforcements. We need to move now." Cole, limping but still standing, wiped blood from his forehead. "Where exactly do you suggest we go, Reed? In case you haven't noticed, we're surrounded." Elias's eyes flickered toward the mother bear, then to Aurora. "Not if we go where they can't follow." Cole frowned. "Oh, hell. You mean—" Elias nodded. "The valley." Cole swore under his breath. "That's a suicide mission." Scarface, still breathing hard, let out a dark chuckle. "Go ahead. Run. See how far you make it. There's nowhere left for you to hide." Elias didn't respond. He was already moving, grabbing Aurora's hand and pulling her toward the trees. The bears followed without hesitation, forming a protective barrier between them and the men still standing. Cole cursed but followed, limping as fast as he could. Aurora glanced back one last time. Scarface was still watching her, something dark in his expression. Not just anger, but something worse, recognition. She shivered and turned away. The bears moved with them, their heavy steps almost soundless in the snow. The forest stretched out before them, endless and unknown. Elias didn't slow. If we make it to the valley, we might have a shot. If we don't, we will, Aurora said, surprising even herself. She didn't know how. She just knew. And for the first time, Elias believed her. Behind them, the first searchlight broke through the trees. The hunt was far from over. Elias lay motionless in the snow, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Blood seeped from the wound in his side, staining the white ground beneath him. The battle had raged fiercely, but now there was only silence, an eerie, heavy stillness in the air. Aurora knelt beside him, her small hands pressing against his coat, trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't leave me now." Elias's eyelids fluttered, his vision blurry. "Kid, you did good," he murmured, his voice barely more than a breath. "Real good." The mother bear stood a few feet away, her massive frame swaying with exhaustion. Her fur was matted with blood, but she was still standing. Around them, the grizzlies lingered, their golden eyes locked onto the retreating figures of the poachers who had fled in terror. The hunters who once thought themselves unstoppable were now the ones running for their lives. Aurora swallowed hard, turning her gaze to the mother bear. "Help him," she pleaded. "Please." The bear let out a deep, rumbling growl. Then, slowly, she lowered herself onto her haunches beside Elias. Aurora didn't understand how, but she felt something pass between them. A quiet understanding, an unspoken promise. Elias shuddered as the bear pressed her massive head gently against his wound. Aurora watched, holding her breath. At first, nothing happened. Then, a warmth, deep, steady, almost ancient, began to spread through him. Elias gasped, his body tensing as the pain dulled, as if something unseen was knitting the wound together from the inside. Aurora felt it too, like an invisible thread connecting them all, the bears, Elias, herself. She didn't question it. She simply knew. When the mother bear finally pulled away, Elias's breathing was steadier. The bleeding had stopped. He groaned, blinking up at Aurora. "What just happened?" Aurora smiled through her tears. "She saved you." Elias shook his head slightly. Still too weak to move, but there was something in his eyes, something like belief. For the first time, he exhaled a shaky breath. "Guess I owe her one." The moment of peace didn't last. A distant rumble echoed through the trees, a low, unnatural sound that sent a shiver down Aurora's spine. The poachers were gone, but something else was coming. Cole appeared from the shadows, his face grim. "We have to move. Now." Aurora helped Elias sit up, though his face twisted in pain. "What is it?" Cole turned his gaze toward the treetops. "The real monsters, the ones who sent those men. They won't be scared off so easily." Aurora frowned. "Who?" The ground shook slightly. A deep vibration like something massive was approaching. Aurora's breath hitched. This wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was something else. Elias forced himself to his feet, gripping Aurora's shoulder for support. "How much time do we have?" Cole's expression darkened. "Not enough." The mother bear let out a warning growl, her ears twitching. The grizzlies around them stirred uneasily, shifting their weight from paw to paw. They sensed it too. Something unnatural. Something wrong. Then, the first shadow emerged from the tree line. Aurora sucked in a sharp breath. It wasn't a man. It wasn't even an animal. It was something in between. A massive figure, covered in thick, bristling fur, stepped into the moonlight. Its body was distorted, unnatural, half human, half beast. Its eyes glowed an unnatural yellow, and when it opened its mouth, rows of jagged teeth gleamed. Elias swore under his breath. They sent them. Cole's knuckles whitened around his gun. Bio-augmented trackers. They're not just here for the bear anymore. They're here for her. He nodded toward Aurora. And they don't leave witnesses. Aurora's stomach turned to ice. She had thought the worst was over. She had been wrong. The creature let out a guttural snarl, its claws flexing as it took another step forward. Then another. More figures emerged from the trees. 5, 6, 7 of them. Their bodies moving with eerie precision. They weren't just hunting. They were surrounding them. The mother bear let out a thunderous roar, and the grizzlies responded in kind. But even Aurora could feel it. This was different. The poachers had been men. These were something else. Something designed to kill. Elias pulled Aurora behind him. Listen to me, kid. When I say run, you run. Don't look back. Aurora's hands balled into fists. No, we fight. Cole barked a laugh. I like the spirit, kid, but I don't think we're walking away from this. Aurora didn't care. She closed her eyes, reached out. The same way she had before, but deeper, more desperate. She didn't just call to the bears this time. She called to something older, something deeper, something buried in the bones of the earth itself. The wind shifted. The creatures hesitated. Then, from the depths of the forest, another sound rose. Not a growl, not a roar. A song, low, resonant, vibrating through the trees like an ancient chant. The grizzlies lifted their heads, their eyes sharpening. The mother bear stepped forward, stronger than before, and in the distance, more shadows moved. Not just bears, wolf, elk. Even the trees themselves seemed to shudder, bending toward the unseen force that had answered Aurora's call. The creatures, the biohybrids, snarled, sensing the shift in power. The lead one lunged, and the mother bear met it midair. The world erupted into chaos. Aurora didn't think. She moved. The bears charged. The wolves flanked. The very forest itself seemed to fight back. Elias fired his last rounds. Cole cursed and swung his knife. And in the center of it all, Aurora stood, her hands raised, guiding the battle in ways she didn't even understand. The creatures were strong, but the wild was strong. One by one, the biohybrids fell, their bodies vanishing into the snow as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. The last one let out a furious howl before a grizzly's paw silenced it for good. And then, silence. Aurora trembled, her body drained. The mother bear, bloodied but victorious, turned to her, lowering her massive head. Aurora pressed her forehead against the bear's fur, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Elias collapsed beside her, laughing weakly. Remind me never to piss you off. Cole groaned, sitting up. Tell me that was the last of them. Aurora wasn't sure, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She knew now. She wasn't just a girl who could talk to bears. She was something else, something new. And whatever came next, she would be ready, because the wild had answered her call. And it would never let her stand alone. Aurora clutched the thick fur of the mother bear, her small fingers digging into the warmth that was rapidly fading. The great beast had given everything, her strength, her fight, her life, to protect them, to protect her. The cold crept into Aurora's bones, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache settling in her chest. Tears streamed down her face, hot against her frozen skin. Please, she whispered, voice cracking. Please don't go. The mother bear exhaled one last breath, a deep, rumbling sigh. And then she was still. A sob tore through Aurora, her body trembling with grief. The other bears lingered nearby, their massive bodies silent. They did not retreat, did not flee. They watched, as if they, too, understood the weight of the loss. The air itself seemed to mourn, the whisper of wind through the trees carrying the sorrow of something ancient and irreplaceable. Elias groaned beside her, barely conscious, his fingers weakly squeezing her hand. "Kid, she's gone, but you're still here. You have to keep going." Aurora wiped at her face with a sleeve, her vision blurry. Elias managed a faint smile. "You already do." A shadow passed over them. Aurora's head jerked up. Through the clearing storm she saw it. A helicopter, circling overhead, its searchlight piercing through the trees. They had been found. Cole swore under his breath. "They just don't quit, do they?" Aurora's pulse pounded. They had lost so much already. She would not lose anyone else. The scarred grizzly, the leader of the wild bears, stepped forward, sniffing the air. His golden eyes locked onto Aurora's. Something passed between them. Something unspoken but powerful. And suddenly, Aurora understood. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. Her grief hardened into resolve. She turned to Elias and Cole. "We don't run. We finish this." Elias let out a weak chuckle. "Hell of a time to grow up, kid." The helicopter hovered lower, wind whipping through the clearing. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Aurora, White, step forward now, and no one else has to get hurt." Cole rolled his eyes. "Oh, that's original." Aurora ignored the voice. Instead, she focused. She closed her eyes, reaching not with her hands, but with something deeper, something ancient. The bears felt it first. Their muscles tensed, their ears perked. Then, from the depths of the forest, they came. Not just grizzlies, wolves, eagles. Even the trees seemed to bend toward her call, whispering with the wind. The wild had answered. The helicopter's spotlight wavered as the air itself seemed to shift. The men aboard hesitated. Then the first bear roared. It was a call to war. The wolves surged forward, weaving between the trees like shadows. The bears followed, their powerful bodies moving as one. The hunters on the ground barely had time to react before the wilderness itself crashed down upon them. Gunfire erupted. A bear staggered back, wounded, but it did not fall. It did not stop. Aurora watched as the wolves darted through the chaos, striking fast and retreating. The helicopter swung sideways, trying to avoid the storm of claws and fury below. Aurora felt everything. Every heartbeat, every breath, every pulse of the earth beneath them. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. She was not just calling the wild. She was the wild. Then, something shifted in the air. A new presence. Not human, not beast. Something in between. Aurora turned, and there, emerging from the wreckage of battle, was Scarface. Bloodied but standing, his rifle gone, his knife gleaming in the firelight. His eyes locked on her were filled with something colder than anger. "You don't get it, do you?" he rasped. "You think you're winning? You think you can stop us? You're just a girl. And they will never stop coming for you." Aurora's heart pounded, but she didn't back down. "I'm not just a girl." Scarface smirked. "Then prove it." He lunged. Aurora didn't have time to think. Her body moved on instinct, her hands flying up. A wall of wind and force slammed into Scarface, knocking him backward. His body hit the ground hard, his breath knocked from his lungs. He stared up at her, wide-eyed. Aurora stepped forward, towering over him. Not in size, but in presence. "Tell them," she said, voice steady. "Tell them to stop." Scarface let out a bitter laugh. "It's bigger than me, kid. You can't stop what's coming. Aurora clenched her fists. We'll see. Scarface exhaled, then his body slumped unconscious. The battle was over. Aurora turned to the mother bear's still form. We did it, she thought. But you should have been here to see it. Elias, leaning heavily against Cole, managed a weak smile. Guess you really did save a whole species. Aurora didn't answer. Instead, she knelt beside the fallen bear, pressing her forehead against its fur. Thank you, she whispered. The wind shifted, warm despite the snow, and for just a moment she thought she heard a voice, soft, distant. You are ready. Aurora closed her eyes. And when she stood again, she was no longer just a girl. She was something more. She was wild. Aurora knelt in the clearing, snowflakes catching in her dark hair as she reached out to the trembling cub. Its fur was thick and golden brown, its wide eyes filled with something she recognized: loss, fear. The same emotions she had carried within her since that fateful night in the storm. The little bear sniffed her cautiously, its breath coming in quick, nervous huffs. Aurora didn't move. She simply felt, reaching out, not with her hands, but with the quiet presence inside her that had only grown stronger since she had called the wild to her aid. The cub blinked. Then, slowly, it stepped forward and pressed its small head against her palm. Aurora exhaled, something inside her unclenching for the first time in weeks. She's chosen you. Aurora looked up. Standing nearby was Dr. Lena Voss, the lead conservationist at the wildlife sanctuary where Aurora had been staying. The woman was tall, with silver-threaded hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Aurora swallowed. She's alone, like I was. Dr. Voss nodded. She was found near the old hunting grounds. No sign of her mother. We believe she was either taken or killed. Aurora's stomach twisted. The war with the poachers had ended, but that didn't mean cruelty had disappeared from the world. There would always be those who saw the wild as something to conquer, something to exploit, and there would always be those who fought back. She needs someone, Aurora murmured, running her fingers gently through the cub's fur. I know what that feels like. Dr. Voss studied her for a moment. Then she spoke. And what about you, Aurora? What do you need? Aurora hesitated. She had never truly let herself ask that question. Not since the night she had lost the mother bear. Not since she had realized she wasn't just a child caught in something bigger than her. She was a part of it. She had been running for so long. But now, perhaps she could stop. Aurora met Dr. Voss's gaze. I need to stay here with them. Dr. Voss's lips curved slightly. I thought you might say that. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Aurora had ever known. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was learning. The sanctuary was nestled deep in the protected forests, a place where injured wildlife was rehabilitated, and where the line between humans and nature was not one of control, but coexistence. Aurora spent her days helping the team, learning how to care for the bears, how to track their patterns, how to understand them in a way no one else could. The cub, whom she named Ember, followed her everywhere. She was smaller than the others, still unsteady on her feet, but she had fire in her heart, just like her mother must have. At night, Aurora dreamed, not of fear, not of death, but of something older, deeper. In her dreams, the mother bear stood in the shadows of the great trees, watching her. Not as a ghost, not as something lost, but as something eternal. One evening, as the sky bled into shades of violet and gold, Elias arrived. He moved slower than before, a lingering stiffness in his side where the wound had been, but he was alive. And for the first time in a long time, he looked at peace. Well, kid, he said, lowering himself onto the wooden steps of the sanctuary lodge. Looks like you found where you belong. Aurora sat beside him, Ember curling up at her feet. I think so. Elias exhaled, glancing out at the tree line. You know, there's still danger out there. People who won't stop just because we won this fight. Aurora nodded. I know. Elias turned to her, his expression more serious now. And you're different, Aurora. You're more than just some kid who got lucky. You have something I don't think anyone fully understands yet. But I know this much. It's powerful. And if you stay here, you'll have to decide what you're going to do with it. Aurora swallowed. She knew Elias was right. The ability she had, the connection to the wild, was not something ordinary. It was something rare. Something that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. But it wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to something greater. She looked down at Ember. Then out toward the deep, endless forest. The wind stirred the leaves, whispering through the trees like a voice just beyond hearing. I don't know what's coming next, she admitted. But whatever it is, I won't run from it. Elias chuckled. That's what I figured. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, something worn, a silver pendant in the shape of a bear's paw. He placed it in Aurora's hand. This belonged to someone I knew a long time ago, a guardian, like you. I think it's yours now. Aurora's fingers curled around it. Warmth spread through her chest, steady and sure, a reminder, a promise. She wasn't just a girl lost in the wilderness anymore. She was part of it, and she would protect it, no matter what came next. In a world that is rapidly changing, where nature often seems like a distant echo of the past, the story of Aurora serves as a powerful reminder of what it means to be connected, to the wild, to ourselves, and to the responsibilities we hold. Her journey was never just about saving one bear or even a species. It was about standing up against the forces that seek to control and exploit, about understanding that true strength lies not in domination, but in coexistence. Today, as forests shrink and species face extinction, we must ask ourselves, what role do we play? Aurora's legacy teaches us that courage is not always about fighting battles with force. Sometimes it is about choosing to protect rather than to conquer, to listen rather than to command. She found her purpose in bridging the gap between humans and nature, an act that mirrors the challenges we face in the modern world. Each of us has the power to make a difference. We may not have Aurora's unique bond with animals, but we can foster a deeper respect for the environment. Whether it is through supporting conservation efforts, advocating for ethical treatment of wildlife, or simply making conscious choices in our daily lives, we are all capable of being guardians of the natural world. The image of Aurora standing in the forest, surrounded by bears unafraid, is more than just the ending of a tale. It is a vision of hope, a future where humans and nature are not adversaries, but allies. It challenges us to rethink our relationship with the earth, to move beyond seeing nature as something separate from ourselves. Because the truth is, we are nature. And just like Aurora, we have a choice: to ignore the call or to answer it with courage, compassion, and action. The question remains, what will we choose? Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable spirit of life. See you in the next story.